Welcome to the Company of Dads podcast, where we explore the sweet, silly, strange, and sublime aspects of being a lead dad in a world where men, who are the go-to parents, aren't always accepted at work, among their friends, or in the community for what they're doing. I'm your host, Paul Sullivan. Our podcast is just one of the many things we produce each week at the Company of Dads. We have various features, including the Lead Dad of the Week. We have our community, both online and in person. And of course, we have podcasts like this. The one-stop shop for all of this is our newsletter, The Dad. Sign up at thecompanyofdads.com/thedad. That's thecompanyofdads.com/thedad. Today, my guest is Brett Edwards, actor, author, lead dad in Dallas. Brett has had a great career in film, appearing in such movies as American Sniper and The Longest Ride, based on a Nicholas Sparks novel. He's been in TV series like Grey's Anatomy, Narcos, CSI, Westworld. He's written 2 novels, one a Western, another about Hollywood, and he's the father of 2 daughters, and his wife works in finance. Brett, welcome to the Company of Dads podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Give us the pre and post kid version of life as an actor in Hollywood.
That's a great question, because one of the things that is imperative when you're doing anything acting is you have to be ready spur of the moment. A lot of times they're behind schedule, whether it's with scripts, shows, auditions, what have you. And you get a call the last minute a lot of times that you have to be across town in LA for an audition. Usually it's, around 4:30, 5 o'clock, right around rush hour. You have to get the 20 miles to Santa Monica when you live in the Valley. And before kids, it was no problem. Pick up, go. A lot of times you work nights too, because most of the auditions are during the day. And that's just the audition process. When you get the part, the schedules can be sporadic as well. You're not exactly sure how many days you're going to shoot, how many, where exactly it's going to be. So pre-kids, it was no problem. And then post-kids, it was quite the juggling act, because there were times when, even you mentioned Grey's Anatomy, when I auditioned for that show, it was on one of the lots there and it was, I can't remember the part of town it was in. And my wife, I can't remember if I had 1 kid or 2 kids at that point, but I remember my wife was working downtown LA and she had to leave a meeting to drive to meet me at the studio lot. I put the kids in her car, basically in the front seat, because she just parked on the side of the street and just hung out with them for about the 15 or 20 minutes that I went in, read my part, walked out, got the kids, put them back in the car, went home. And, I think they called me, before I got home that I got the part, but it was just, I got the audition that day. So it becomes a juggling act. And, one of the great things that Allison and I do really well is we support each other a lot. And that goes both ways, and we're always there for each other. And it really makes, it's the only way to make it work.
Well, I mean, the good thing is when you were living in LA, I mean, at least there's not traffic. So you could just quickly get wherever you needed to be. So that's
no problem.
You don't have to really plan. And I'm sure casting agents were totally understanding when you said, I got to pick some kids up at daycare at 3 o'clock. We just pushed this back.
Yeah. No, I've had pushback when I said, is it okay if I bring my daughter or daughters to the audition? They're really well behaved. They will just sit in the waiting room and they'll wait. And a lot of them are like, I'm not so sure, because they've seen the screaming kid before. And I get it. I understand. But I've had to take my girls on a couple of auditions, and I don't want to say that it's helped me any, but every time they've been perfectly behaved, and it's been an easy process.
Yeah, and you resisted becoming a stage dad, right? You resisted putting them on film somehow.
Yes, it's hard enough being a young guy in that industry. I can't imagine what it's like to be a girl, a child even in that industry. And, ironically enough, I got called into a Boot Barn audition once, and I had to take my whole family because we were traveling and we were on our way back from a trip, and they liked me for the audition, but then they said, "Is that your family out there?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, can we meet them? And I said, "Sure." And the girls came in, and girls were their charming selves. I don't even think Pee-wee was old enough to talk yet. And they were like, well, what do you think about casting the whole family for this? And I said, no, not going to happen. It's just, I didn't want, when the girls are old enough to be conscious enough to make that decision, that's on them. I will try to guide them away from the industry as much as I can, although one seems to have a knack for it. But I want them to make the decision. I don't want to be the guy that says, yeah, it seems like fun, let's do it. And then they really like it. And before you know it, you're kind of too far down the rabbit hole to turn back.
Right. All right. What could be a sort of, fun, interesting family story as a one-off could also turn the other way and become this slippery slope. And next thing you know, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. That is one of the things, when I look at some of the, roles you've been cast in, are really, traditionally masculine roles. But I know from talking to you that you're the youngest of 5 and you have 4 older sisters. Obviously you have, 2 daughters. How do you view masculinity, sort of modern masculinity? How do you view that in real life versus perhaps, some of the roles that you're known for, that people have seen you?
Yeah. I think that one of the things that's really important about masculinity that often gets overlooked is, regardless of work, status, whatever, the man, his job is for stability, emotional, financial, whatever it is, whatever you're lacking in, the man's job, at least in masculinity wise, is you have to be stable. You have to provide that balance. And I do play, it's hard because my dad, growing up, he was a man's man. He was born in 1935. He got drafted. He grew up in San Francisco in the Italian neighborhood. And, back when they had all the segregated neighborhoods in the late 30s, early 40s of San Francisco. And he was just school of hard knocks. He lived hard. He played hard. He worked hard. He didn't show really any emotion at all. And so I think that, I have 4 older sisters. I was always around women. And when my dad came around, I just wanted to do the things that he was doing, but he was in the booze business. It wasn't appropriate for me to follow him around to the office per se.
Right.
And
because the office was a bar. The office was a liquor store.
Midnight.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure I would have loved to be there, but good on him for not allowing me to do it. And, this old saying of, you learn how to be a man by watching your father and listening to your mother. And I think that happened a lot, is I would kind of just observe my dad as much as I could and listen to my mom talk about him. And I remember when I was a kid that my dad was really old school, and my mom asked me to unload the dishwasher. I was a young boy, and, I got sisters who were doing all kinds of stuff in the kitchen. And my dad said, no son of mine's going to unload the dishwasher. And she said, no son of mine's going to sit there and watch. And they got into this major argument. And they saw things.
And were you just like standing there holding the Tupperware? Like, what the hell am I supposed to do with this? Like, do I put it back in?
I was glued to my seat because I didn't really want to do it. And, I was just a punk kid. And my mom ended up winning that battle because, living with 4 or 5 women in the house, my dad learned to pick certain fights and just move on with the others. And so I remember that was quite, that was sort of a rift between the two on what kind of roles and what one should do. And I saw that my mother worked just as hard as my father did. And still she came home and she made dinner for everyone. Sometimes not the same dinner, even. She catered to everyone's wants and cleaned up at the end. And my dad sat there and ate and smoked and drank and went to bed. And so I thought, I think subconsciously I thought, as I was growing up, first I never thought I'd have kids. And when I had kids, I didn't think much of being a dad. But when they came into the world, I thought, I don't want it to be like it was when I was growing up. I'm going to do the things that my dad wouldn't do, because I don't see why not, if I'm able.
Yeah.
And it seems to work out. We just, and in terms of masculinity, I don't know. There's a role that needs to be filled. I think as a society, we don't give a damn enough about youth as we should, in terms of raising them with appropriate values and appropriate care, and whatever the values may be, but be there to teach them and help them grow and guide them and allow them to make the mistakes, but allow them to correct it as well. And so it's, that's become, as I've had kids, it's become a major issue for me. Um, uh, the lack of parenting that I've seen, I think it's kind of just made me pour myself into it even more.
Yeah, yeah. I want to kind of go back to the dishwasher story because it's so no, it's not. It's like it's so telling that there are certain things. There's so much of our childhood that we don't remember. And I remember I didn't grow up with very much, and my parents got divorced, and my dad kind of had intermittent jobs, and my mom worked in the hospital as a nurse. And I remember once I was with my dad at work. He was selling used cars, and we were at the auction, and he bought me like a big cookie, like a big, like not like a big chocolate chip cookie. And I'd never had that before. And I remember that I I got excited and I moved too quickly and I broke it and I dropped it. And there it was on the ground. And he was really good about it. He didn't get it mad, but I always remember feeling like, holy cow, $3, $4, whatever it was not, we were not a family that had stuff like this on a regular basis. It always stuck with me. And it's informed all kinds of things of my own parenting, that one little cookie story. But for you, that story about, the dishwasher, such a thing that today it's a very gender neutral thing. Like kids are put to work, all the time doing stuff they need to be,
Right.
If anything, it's the opposite. Some kids grow up in families that have some level of affluence, it's sort of mine and yours do, that they don't have to do these things. You're like, well, wait a second, that's not a good thing. But when you think about that, like how that, formed you, and I don't want to put all the emphasis on the dishwasher, but how it formed you in the roles that you were going to do in real life versus, there you are in, American Sniper playing, a super masculine role. How does that inform sort of the lessons that you want to teach your daughters? They're young, but they're watching everything you do. The lessons you want to teach your daughters, and the type of, father and husband you want to be today.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it comes down to, there's obviously the stereotypical masculinity, and then there's honest masculinity, I guess, in the sense that it's walk softly and carry a big stick. And I think that, man, I don't know. That's a good question because it kind of makes me think about it. Like I said, I watched my father and I listened to my mother, and my parents were always arguing growing up. I remember that very distinctly, and I remember it was mostly about petty stuff. And so when I got married and we had kids, didn't want to fight in front of the kids, and because I couldn't stand that when I was a kid. I couldn't sleep, and I would listen to them, and my door was always cracked, and I remember like, this stuff is easy. You can rectify this so easy. You guys just come to some sort of agreement that you get up and you work together and you do the things together, and like everybody's tired. And then, I remember the few times that, like, I don't know. My dad was just he was a tough son of a bitch, and nobody messed with him and everybody respected him. And so I think that not all of that bled off onto me, but in terms of like the masculine roles, I think because I gravitate towards those types of guys that I tend to be able to imitate them a little bit better. And it's completely separate for me from everyday life. So for instance, like American Sniper, I had worked on another movie before that, which allowed me to do about 3 to 6 months of prep work to become this Marine. And so by the time I got the audition for American Sniper, I was fully into the character for this other film. And it was just like kind of a perfect storm. And I read for American Sniper and I ended up getting the role. And I remember being on set, and most of the time I was hanging out instead of with the actors who kind of all congregate together, I was hanging out with the stunt guys and all the military coordinators. I just seemed to get along with them better. And I remember the one guy who played the Navy SEAL, who played himself. He was a Navy SEAL that served on the teams with Chris Kyle. He said, he came up in between takes. He's like, man, how long were you in the Marines? And I said, I was never in the Marines. And he said, you're shitting me. And I said, no. And he goes, you look like more of a Marine than the Marines we got on set. And I was like, one of the best compliments I had as
that
an
must
actor.
have really made the Marines on set happy, because
yeah, he didn't shout it, but there was a lot of arguments between Navy SEALs and Marines on the set, which was all in good fun. But I understand that type of masculinity more so than I do the lead dad part. Every day I feel like, but the thing about the lead dad and doing the domestic stuff is I feel like every day, if I don't quite get there, I feel like I could have done better. And I think I go to bed the next night and I think, well, what can I do tomorrow as a dad that can be better?
Do you think that's because, like, as an actor, the role is finite? You may get it on the first take, you may get it on the third take, or you may get it on the 20th take, but it's eventually done, and then the director has to be happy with it, and that's it. It's in the film. Versus, being a lead dad, being a father, it's almost like the Bill Murray film, Groundhog Day. Like every day you wake up, you're like, okay, same day, let's try this again. Is that,
yeah, but it's more of it's more of like a marathon of a play on Broadway, because you get one take. I feel like you get one chance to do it. And there are little chapters within that where you try to start the day well and you try to end the day well, no matter what happens in between. But I think that's one of the things that weighs on me is sometimes when I'm tough on the kids in a way that I firmly believe I should be tough, or a value or something that I believe should be instilled. I think that's one of the things that weighs on me. It's like, did I push too hard? Did I not push enough? What can I do better about it tomorrow? And so it's almost like you go out, you do the scene, you go back behind the curtain and you think, okay, maybe I don't have all my great stuff tonight. When I go back in the next scene, I'm going to try to do it a little bit better. And so that's kind of the way that I look at it. But yeah, a film, the funny thing about films, and I learned this really quick in TV shows, is that when you go on them, you're surrounded by these people for 12 to 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. And really quickly you become really great friends because there's a lot of downtime. Film, TV, it's hurry up and wait. So you're sitting there and you got a lot of time to talk. And by the end of the shoot, you feel like you're found a new best friend, and because you have you have a common goal, and you completed the common goal, and you've spent a lot of time together talking about other stuff. But then I found that those friendships really quickly just fade away because everybody goes on to their next project.
The next film.
And it's not a company that you go into every day, and everybody's trying to hustle to get their own, and so. It's very easy to separate the two for me because of that.
Yeah. I mean, are there, now that you're a dad, you've got two girls, are there certain roles that you don't want to take anymore? Are there certain roles that you seek out above others?
Yeah, that's another thing. I've turned down a few roles because of the explicit nature of the roles. As the girls get older and they get more conscious about it, they start asking me questions because they've seen a few of the things just from like passing me at the computer, when I'm working on, say, a demo reel or something like that. And they're like, that's you on TV. And I say, yeah. And they say, what are you doing? And, it's kind of hard. It's like, oh, nothing, you can't just turn it off because they're really inquisitive. Right. And
this isn't a horror movie that I'm in that would scare the hell out of you and you won't sleep in your bed for a month and a half. This is not what you just saw.
Yeah, exactly. So I just, I find myself being much more conscious about it. And I'm trying to get to a place where the roles that I take, that they can watch. And that's even some of the content in terms of a writer. That's one of the major issues I had. A lot of the stuff that I was writing, it was dark, it was gritty, like the Western that you mentioned. Yeah. And it's good. It's kind of stuff that I love to watch, kind of like Yellowstone, but there's something I wish, my kids and I, we watch a lot of films and TV shows together, but 95% of it's animated. And I wish that there were more live action things that the kids could watch. Mm. Louis L'Amour wrote how many novels? He never mentioned a bad word in any of them.
Right.
So.
That's interesting. Talk to me about the move from Los Angeles to Dallas. I think was it pre-pandemic or just as a pandemic was starting? How did that move come about? Yeah.
It was the end of 2020, and
Lockdown in LA? Come on, it's sunny every single day. How could that be bad? Like, I'm like Randy Newman when I go to LA. Like, if I could be locked down anywhere, I would pick Los Angeles or maybe San Diego. That's probably.
I know, but that's one of those things. It's when it's the same thing every day. I remember when we'd go visit Washington and it's raining and we're like, oh gosh, I miss the rain. Or you go to Colorado and you miss the snow. And then now that I'm here in the winter in Dallas, I'm like, I miss the 300 days a year in LA where it's perfect.
Sunshine. Exactly. Yeah. Dreary, miserable. Like maybe I could go outside today. No, it's gray and awful.
Yeah. But my wife grew up in South Dakota, in Texas, and I grew up in Kentucky. And I used to ride my bike to school. I had this little motorized scooter that I had a dog that followed me everywhere on. We'd drive it to the local Dairy Mart. I'd get her a can of beef jerky that was shredded, that looked like a can of dip, and I'd get a slushie, and we'd sit at the Dairy Mart, and then I'd ride my GoPed home, my scooter home, and she followed me. And when we started having kids,
that sounds like a scene from a movie.
That's the way I see it.
It sounds exactly like the scene, and it opens right there. And then depending on what type of movie it is, if it was like the horror film that you're in, then everybody like zombies come out and the kid's done. Or it's a nice film and he goes home and everything's fine.
That's right. He sees a girl on the way home, and the dog starts to take second fiddle. But so we didn't want our kids to grow up in LA because we wanted them to kind of have the same things that we had. It's a tough city, and I can't imagine raising kids. Are you in New York?
I'm just outside in Connecticut. Yeah, but mine is more like Norman Rockwell type town, like classic New England downtown. Yeah. Kids can 10 minutes they can walk through our backyard and be in town and get ice cream or whatever. So
amazing. And so we were actually considering moving to New York before my wife found out she was pregnant. And so anyway, we started looking at schools for the kids because they were getting old enough. And then the pandemic hit and we were locked down for a few months. And this was in July where we said, well, let's go see what Texas is like. We hear it's open there. And so we traveled to Texas and we loved it. We just love it's a different feel, the people, the culture, it's all different than LA. And, my wife and I were both really busy with work, and she was doing almost a 2-hour commute every day to Laguna Beach or Newport Beach from the Valley. Wow. And that was 2 hours there sometimes and 2 hours back. And so she just started getting burnt out, and it was kind of risky, but it was for the kids. I mean, in terms of...
Did you have any family or did you have any family?
We had no family. Yeah. We had no jobs. And the jobs that I book, obviously, it's not like, hey, I've got another one in the pipeline. It's like I could have an audition this week, but I don't have anything that's secure. And she was going to leave she left her job and has since founded her own company. But at the time, we had nothing in it, and we just had a little bit of money in the bank. And
did you love the Dallas Cowboys or something? Like, finish the story here. How do you pick Dallas of all,
Dallas was, in case I had to go to LA for an audition or to New York, it's an easy flight. You can always get on one. And same thing for her. If she had to go out for a meeting, then there are plenty of flights. So it seemed reasonable. I mean, I think more reasonable maybe would have been just to move a little bit further outside LA to where you could drive in to work. But we love it. It's been great. Texas the weather's a little tough. I don't mind the heat, but we get a lot of thunderstorms, some tornado watches, flooding. We got here in November of 2020, and then February of 2021 was the freeze where we lost power for 4 days. And so the girls got acquainted with Texas really quick and how tough you have to be to make it here. And we made it through all right. And we've been happy ever since.
But I've spent more time. I've good friends both in Los Angeles and in outside of Dallas, Fort Worth. So I've been to both places often. But when I think of Los Angeles, given just the sheer number of people who work in the entertainment industry, I mean, even the busiest actors, the busiest writers, they're not working a traditional full-time job. Like probably the busiest people are working a couple months a year, and then you have a lot of time to to be. You wonderful restaurants, wonderful cafes. You can be with your kids, take them there. But Dallas is much more a town, at least from my experience, where people have jobs. They go to work and you come home, and on the weekends you do your thing. What has it been like for you as a lead dad, as a father, as a husband, to be in Dallas, to be with the girls, when you're not, working on a show or something like that? What's it been like, as you've tried to sort of, make your way, socially, as a man in Dallas, finding friends while still being, a father and a successful actor?
Yeah, it's been much easier. I made more friends here quicker than I ever had in totality when I lived in Los
Is that
Angeles.
because you're so good at the accents and you just kind of created this Texas accent that never existed before? Is that it?
Yeah, exactly. It just started coming out as soon as I crossed the border,
Yeah.
and it's been good. I've found we live in the smallest county in Texas, and square footage wise, it's really tiny. I think it's 12 square miles, and so the town is really small. You start to meet a lot of the same people, and a lot of them have kids that are my kids' age, and so that makes it easy to meet people and to get along with people. Um, and because we never had that, all of our friends in Los Angeles, they never had kids, or if they did have kids, they were much older,
Right.
and it just in LA, it's so hard to get from A to B that if you really want to meet up for the kids to get together or just to hang out, it's got to be a thing, unless you live in the same borough. And I think like I've been getting the girls into a lot of stuff outdoors since we've been here. They ride horses now, and they're really good at it. And they actually learned in California, though. They play golf, and they're only 4 and 6, but they love to just be outdoors. And so anything there's a lot of museums here that are easy to do in 2 hours. You can go and come back in 2 hours, and so there's a lot of field learning that can be done. But it's been easy. It's been easy to find friends. It's been easy for the kids. They're now in their schools, and they're starting to have a base that they feel good about and that they don't want to leave. And I think that's great.
This has been great, Brett. I've really enjoyed having you on the Company Dads podcast today. One last question for you, because our community that we created of lead dads, it's lead dads of all different types of backgrounds. And when you think of the way the choices that you made to sort of balance your career with being a great husband and a great father, what are some of the 1, 2, 3 lessons that you learned along the way that you could share with some of the listeners who are perhaps maybe they're struggling with being a lead dad, or maybe they're struggling with talking about being a lead dad? Are there anything that stands out that you would think is a good lesson, a good takeaway for the listeners from your experience?
I think if you take an active mind into molding your kids to be, one of the rules that is really important is, you don't allow your children to become someone you dislike, because the dislike turns to hate, and then you loathe your children, and that's not something that you want. And so when you start to see little things that you dislike about your children in terms of, and it's a learning process. It's not like they're malicious. It's not like they mean to do it. You have to raise them up in the way that they should go. And so don't allow them to become someone you dislike. And when you start to, if you're struggling with what people think of you as a lead dad, or what people think of you for taking the reins, I think one of the important things is to, let your kids show how successful that could be. And so what that means is that if your kid is really well behaved and has really good manners and is doing well in school, that reflects directly on you. And so I know a lot of people who, and it didn't even occur to me because I wasn't doing it for myself. I was doing it because I want my kids to have a better foot on the ground than I had. I was really idealistic, kind of I could do anything that I wanted. And I think that's great, but there has to be some sort of concrete evidence that allows you to believe that. And so, and also some sort of understanding of how to act around adults. And so that was really important with our kids. And so my wife and I both instilled that in us, in the kids, and it showed. And, one of the things people would say is, you all are doing such a great job. Your kids are so well behaved. They're so smart. And, it sounds like bragging, but that's what they were saying to us. And so then it kind of resonated with me where, I took a back seat to work because, especially when I'm talking about turning down roles that I don't feel are a good fit for having girls, I'm like, well, what's really important here? I had a major injury about 14 months ago in which I basically had a paralyzed left arm and severe nerve damage. And it allowed me to take a step back and go, like, what's really important? Is it the movies that are important? Is it the money? Or, if I were to die falling off that ladder, who would I want to see most? And it was my children. And I wouldn't want to see them jumping around the hospital room, throwing ice cream everywhere and acting a fool. I want them to be well behaved and conduct themselves in an appropriate manner and come and see me. And I'd want to be next to them. And so that was kind of the catalyst for me, where I'm like, even though some days I begrudgingly do it, it's really a value. And so don't denigrate the value of having a strong, stable man in the household, because like my wife says, when I'm in a good mood, the whole family's in a good mood. So you're the leader of how everybody else feels and goes out and attacks the world.
That's a great way to end. Thank you again, Brett Edwards.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for listening to Company of Dads podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. But I'm here to tell you it's just one of the many offerings we have at the Company of Dads. We've got another podcast. We have a weekly newsletter. We have various features. We have events that we put on both online and in person. If you want to know about all of those, the best place to learn about them is to go to thecompanyofdads.com/thedad. That's thecompanyofdads.com/thedad. What do you get if you do that? That's how you sign up for our weekly newsletter, The Dad, which is a one-stop shop for all things lead dad. Thank you again for listening.